The first tip I'd like to share with you here in the Instructors Lounge is how I use my student study guide together with my own Digital Tutors playlist. So once you've logged into Digital Tutors, you'll find that there is just an enormous amount of content to choose from. You're really spoiled. There's a lot of things you'd like to do, but you really need to streamline the content that you deliver to match the units of competency that you may be delivering in your own course. So let's use mine as an example here. So in my study guide over here on the right, we see that I'm delivering these 3 units for a cluster that we've called 3D Modeling and Animation 1. It's an entry-level class that shows students the basics of modeling, texturing, lighting, and animation. I can see the start and close of study date here. I can see all the teacher details and contact details. On the following page here, I get a little bit more descriptive about what each of those units involve. And then on the next page, we have a list of assignments that are to be completed during the course of that term and the due dates. On the next page here, I have the delivery session schedule, and this is where you start to outline to students what content you want them to stick to with Digital Tutors so that they are still meeting the learning needs of the particular course that you are delivering for your institution, wherever you are in the world. And this is what I've started to do. In the past, I've always given out my study guide during the first week of the term. And what I've found is that the students are often overwhelmed with admin issues that they have to deal with in the first week of a new course. They have to get their student ID set up, they're meeting new friends, they're finding their way around, they're trying to log into computers, and then all of a sudden you start talking to them about 3D concepts, and some of them just seem to have a little bit of a meltdown, understandably, with the amount of information they have to take in that first week. So during the course of orientation, the week before or even 2 weeks before the class begins, I've gotten into the habit of meeting those students and passing out my study guide and having a chat to them and getting them set up with Digital Tutors and explaining how it all works so they can do some pre-class preparation before the class begins. And this has made all the difference to getting my students up and running quickly within those first 2 or 3 weeks of a course. So over here in my study guide, for pre-class preparation, I have asked them to do 7 CG 101 courses that I've selected from the Digital Tutors library. So if I go over here to where I'm logged on and move down to where I've saved my playlists, you'll see here that I have a number of playlists that relate to this class over the year that they spend with me with a Diploma of Screen and Media. So for the class that we're talking about here, 3D Modeling and Animation 1, I've got 3 playlists set up. There's Playlist 1, Playlist 2, and Playlist 3. So let's look at Playlist 1 here, and this is what I've asked them to complete before they start week 1. The idea here is that I want to introduce them to basic concepts. I want them to understand the basic language, the basic terminology of what we're going to be getting into over the next 10 weeks so that it's not so foreign to them in the first week. So from the Digital Tutors library, I've chosen these several CG 101 courses: General 3D Terminology, Modeling, Texturing, Lighting, Animation, and Rendering. And you can see within each of these courses, they are short snippets about the basics of a particular subject there. So with 3D Terminology here, what's a basic 3D pipeline from start to finish? What are storyboards? How do they evolve into animatics? What's involved in modeling, and what are some of the basic tools in the modeling process? More specifically with modeling, what's some modeling terminology we might come across? How do we use orthographic drawings? Are we going to be using image planes? Are we using box modeling? Are we subdividing surfaces within our models? What are some of the building blocks of our models? Vertices, edges, etc. So some of these terms that the students may never have heard of, by doing this pre-class preparation, you'll find that within the first week you can jump straight to the modeling, texturing, lighting, etc. exercises fairly confidently, knowing that the students have a better understanding of what you're talking about. So that's what I'm asking them to complete before they actually turn up for the first week. Then during the first week, We go through and talk about a lot of workstation issues, what sort of equipment we'll need to run the courses, whether you need a Wacom, and that's led me here to actually incorporate some other playlists in here as well. Now, these aren't specific to this particular subject that I'm delivering, but they're still very important to what we do overall. So for example, I am teaching specifically here an entry-level course on 3D modeling and animation, but it still would be fantastic if the students had some fundamental knowledge of art practices. So for example, if they had some basic understanding of color theory and composition, they will take that with them throughout the first part of the course. So even though I'm not delivering that officially, I can direct them to that before they start, so they've got a better understanding there before they start modeling. And the same with something like learning to use a Wacom device. I like all of my students to use a Wacom from day one, and I really encourage them every day to use it and not to put the pen down. So before they start, I introduce them here to learning how to use a Wacom device for some of the different applications that we may be using. So you can see here, by the time they start with me in the first week, they've had a chance to look at some fundamentals of art. They've had a chance to look at how to use a Wacom tablet. They've looked at some basic 3D terminology. So in the first week, when I start to say, okay, let's now jump in and do some exercises and actually create something, the whole class can move along a lot quicker. And that leads us down here to the bottom of week 1. So after we've had our discussions and introductions, we can then start to pick and choose other topics within the Digital Tutors library. And some of the ones I've chosen here are the Beginner's Guide to Max, which is the application we're using for this particular course, then the Beginner's Guide to Modeling, and then the Beginner's Guide to Animation. So once again, we're slowly building up our skills on a week-to-week basis. So I'm assuming that they've done some prior knowledge coming into the course. At the end of the first and second week, I'm getting them to do these exercises here, and then moving on into the weeks after that. If we look further ahead with the playlist here, from weeks 3 and weeks 4, you can see we're moving on to more advanced playlists. So with playlist number 3 here, I'm getting the students to model up a character for animation and then add in facial topology for further animation purposes down the track. So that's just a quick overview of how I have set up my playlists, added them to my student study guide, and given the students a course of study to follow at their own pace. In the next tip, I'd like to show you how I incorporate the playlist with my assessment items and give the students a chance to allow their creativity to run wild and make modifications to some of the work that we're doing here in Digital Tutors. So I'll see you at the next tip.